Hello, 3 minutes after 10 is the time. You hear that music, the way it rises like that. The thing I did just before the news, when I said, and I shall share that statistic with you shortly, that wasn't me being all clever and professional radio, doing what we like to call in the trade a hook and tease, to make sure you keep tuned into LBC over the news bulletin and the advertisements rather than perhaps flicking around. I got slightly taken by surprise by the crescendo, so I was sort of halfway through my burblings about this astonishing statistic that has just come out of the new census in Northern Ireland, and I thought, well, I'll leave it right to the end, and then I'll drop it, and then the music said, and I realised I'm not going to have time to read it out, and I haven't got the exact numbers in front of me because I forgot to. Yes, so I just pretended that it was, and then because I have so much love and respect for you, I thought I can't sustain. I'm going to have to tell you the truth. I can't start the show on a smoke and mirror sort of tip, can I? So I didn't do that on purpose. I was not intending to say, find out after the news what it is that's happened in Northern Ireland that is so remarkable. I'll read you the first line of the story from the Belfast Telegraph. It seems an appropriate source for this story. Catholics have outnumbered Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time. The latest census results have revealed. 46% of the population are now Catholic, 43% are Protestant or another Christian religion. There's also some quite interesting moves, some quite profound shifts in how people think of themselves in terms of national identity, whether they think of themselves as British or Irish or a combination of both. Indeed, there is even an option to go for the hat trick, British, Irish and Northern Irish. All three of those things. There's a really surprisingly low figure for people in Northern Ireland who consider themselves simultaneously British, Irish and Northern Irish. I don't know that we need a massive introduction on this one. I've got quite a lot to say, but it possibly isn't as interesting as what you, as someone with roots in Northern Ireland or listening currently in Northern Ireland, has to say. Let's find out. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. It's 6 minutes after 10. And there are now more Catholics in Northern Ireland than Protestants. What does that mean? What does that mean for the present and perhaps more pertinently for the future? Hit these numbers now. You will get through. So here's a funny thing. It depends, I think, in part on how old you are, but everybody British has some sort of relationship with Northern Ireland, whether you have Irish heritage, as I obviously do, or not. Not least because of the Troubles, not least because of the fact that the IRA's atrocities on these islands, in Great Britain, defined a generation almost. I grew up, as you probably know by now, in a journalist's household. My dad was a journalist. That he was the Midlands correspondent of the Daily Telegraph. The Birmingham Six was a story that obviously, given the later acquittals, it ran through his career like the River Thames runs through London. There was even, and I wrote a little about this in my first book, when I was young, you would even, as someone with an Irish surname, get treated similarly to how Muslims were treated when Islamist atrocities, Islamist terrorism began to kick off. You'd have that idea that because you were Irish, you were somehow complicit, or because you are Irish, you must be a terrorist, which is, as a kid, absolutely nonsensical. It makes no sense at all. But I remember, sort of 11, 12 years old, I could still tell you the name of the kid that did it, actually, but I don't think that would be fair, being called a terrorist at my prep school, at my very sort of middle class, upper middle class, exclusive prep school. A very strange experience. And I'm not mentioning any of this for particularly profound reasons. I'm just talking about how we all have relationships with Northern Ireland, whether you realise it or not. For much younger people, it's going to be the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement is actually why you don't have as complicated or serious a relationship with Northern Ireland as both a concept and a territory as older people do. You haven't lived under the shadow of sectarian violence in Northern Ireland itself, or indeed terrorist activity in Great Britain. It is also probably worth mentioning, while I'm giving my chapter and verse on this one, that my first ever political speech at the age of 10, I was quite frighteningly precocious. At the age of 10, in a mock election for what must have been the 1982 There was a general election in 82. Was it 82 or 83? Okay, it's possible I just looked at the wrong colleague then. I stood as an SDLP candidate, which was a very little-known party in Great Britain at the time. Well, certainly among most 10 and 11-year-olds. I mean, part of the reason was because the big boys got to choose the big parties in the mock election that we had at my school. The big boys would be the Conservatives and the Labour and the Liberal Democrats. But I was, as I say, horribly precocious and political. Really wanted to get involved in it. And so the SDLP, which of course produced some of the finest politicians Northern Ireland has ever seen, many of whom proved to be absolutely exceptional architects of the ultimate Good Friday Agreement. But the idea as a young person of Ireland not being united was quite influential for me. It was quite formative. The sense of an unfairness to it, and the knowledge that it was a largely religious divide, and I felt the statistical inevitability of there being more Catholics one day there than Protestants. I guess at some point in the last few years that has ceased to be a statistical inevitability, hasn't it? Because I don't know if you remember the Monty Python song, Every Sperm is Sacred, but the moratorium upon contraception in Ireland among the Catholics meant that the birth rate among Catholics in Northern Ireland would be higher than among Protestants. The religious instruction not to use contraception, which many Catholics obeyed, meant that the population growth on one side of the religious divide was always likely to overtake population on the other side of the religious divide. But when you think that sort of attitude to contraception has been in pretty swift retreat in Northern Ireland for a very long time, the inevitability of it perhaps becomes slightly diluted. I don't know. I mean, there you go. There it is. There's some of my early ponderings on this remarkable statistic. There are now more Catholics in Northern Ireland than there are Protestants, or depending on how you like the language to be conveyed, Catholics have outnumbered Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time. So call me now and tell me what this means. What does it mean in the context of a united Ireland, most obviously? Does this, like Brexit, accelerate the likelihood of a united Ireland? The Northern Ireland Protocol, which of course was negotiated by David Frost and celebrated and trumpeted by Boris Johnson, still has senior Conservatives in both politics and media desperately trying to disown it or find somebody else they can blame it on rather than their own heroes. It is a growing, or certainly not a likely to disappear anytime soon problem, but it's not insuperable. There have been some fairly positive noises actually coming from both camps. The problem is there's a suspicion Liz Truss doesn't want resolution. She quite likes the idea of a continuing fight with Brussels over this, with the European Union over this. But the idea when I was 10 or 11 years old that we would sit here in 2022 and actually talk about Northern Ireland as a place where Catholics are in the majority, and don't forget that we're supposed to have a First Minister from Sinn Féin in the Stormont at the moment, if they ever actually get back to work, then we're looking at something absolutely huge, something portentous, and something that may have a profound and permanent impact upon the very future of the United Kingdom. In fact, and this is why I need calls, because, I mean, I made a New Year's resolution at the beginning, I think, of last year that we were going to pay a heck of a lot more attention to events in Northern Ireland, in Scotland and in Wales, but I am still far from expert. I'm a lot more confident on more English-based issues than I am on Northern Irish ones, but I would imagine, and I am absolutely prepared to retreat at 100 miles an hour from what I'm about to say, this surely is the beginning of the end of the United Kingdom, isn't it? 03456060973 is the number you need. I mean, how can it not be? Given that essentially, after partition, Northern Ireland was the sort of Protestant enclave where Catholics for generations were treated as third, fourth, fifth class citizens and remained in a minority, while Southern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, was the Catholic sovereign nation, if you like. You now have a majority of Catholics in Northern Ireland, and indeed a majority, or at least an electoral victory for the Republican political party. this simple statistical fact seems to me as very much a plastic paddy looking across the sea to a place I don't understand, but I do feel deeply about. This, to me, feels like the beginning of the end of the United Kingdom, which is, I hope, sufficient reason to explain to you, if you're feeling a bit baffled by my choice of story at 10 o'clock this morning, why I think this is of huge importance. And that is the question I've got for you. What does this mean to you, or indeed to the country? And pick whichever country you please. Ireland, Northern Ireland, United Kingdom, Great Britain, England, I don't know. What does it mean? 0345 6060 973. And is this... In fact, I'm going to leave it as a question, but it's pretty close to a statement. I would say this was 52% question, 48% statement. This is surely the beginning of the end of the United Kingdom, or even the middle of the beginning of the end of or possibly even the end of the United Kingdom, isn't it? So feel free to agree, feel free to disagree, or feel free to not answer that question at all and talk instead about the significance that this statistic, this news story has for you and for everybody. You know what I say now, don't you? I'm also bang on time for once. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Your thoughts, please, on the news that Northern Ireland now is home to more Catholics than Protestants. It's 10:15. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we examine the news, reflect upon the news that Catholics now outnumber Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time. I can imagine a younger listener sitting there thinking, he's lost his marbles. Who cares? What's this got to do with the price of tea? But of course, anybody over the age, I don't know what age you'd pick, over the age of 40 perhaps, is going to be going, good grief, how the world turns, eh? Isn't that remarkable? And also, while we're speaking about how the world turns, some research around at the weekend showing that a poor or the least well-off families in Ireland are about, I think the figure was about 60% better off than the least well-off families in England now. So it's almost time to start getting your media from somewhere else other than the Daily Mail. Now, Brenda in Belfast is on the line. Brenda has achieved that unique, or not unique, but that revered status that when certain subject matters come up on the programme, Twitter is alive with people saying, I bet Brenda in Belfast has got something to say about this, and here she is. Brenda, what have you got to say about this?
Well, as you can see, the crack's 90 over here, James. It's all go. The airwaves are completely filled with Catholics outweigh the Protestants. Yeah, Northern Ireland Twitter is going nuts. Irish Twitter will probably join in shortly.
Yes.
It was forecast that this would happen. Ian Paisley obviously was right. He said the Catholics bred like vermin was one of his statements.
Just to be clear, your tongue is in your cheek before my inbox lights up and people object to your use of language. You're merely quoting the late Reverend Ian Paisley.
I am just quoting.
Yes.
I know the rules of broadcast, so yes, I'm just quoting what was said. It's not as clear cut, James. As you know, I've told you before, I lived in Warwickshire for 2 years. So people ask, was it the division here based on religion? It was for certain people, but for a lot of people, it was just about injustice and about oppression. History does state that when Northern Ireland when the British border was put into Ireland, it was declared that it would be a Protestant state for Protestant people.
Yes.
There was no such thing as one person, one vote, which is where the civil rights protest came from. But I think it's important for a lot of people to understand that a lot of people here actually don't care that much about religion. It's a political situation that we have here.
I do understand that, and possibly I should qualify slightly. This I see certainly with the question about nails in coffins. I see very much as being a companion piece to Sinn Féin's electoral gains and electoral successes in recent elections. So that there is the politics. I mean, I wouldn't want to be the one to separate politics from religion completely in the context of Northern Ireland or Ireland. But no, you're quite right. It's not as if everybody even goes to church anymore or commits themselves religiously to a position defined by their faith. But it is significant.
No. It is, of course, it's significant. It's significant because of our history. If anybody says it's not, if anybody says it's insignificant, they're completely wrong about that. But we're pushing for a political political prosperity here, people being more politically aligned, will obviously identify their religion with maybe certain other parties. But what we're trying to achieve here is to maintain the peace that was brought around by the Good Friday Agreement. That people bear that in mind. There's nights people saying, okay, it's time for a border poll. It's a time to unite the country. But we cannot have a border poll here unless the majority of people here agree to a border poll, which is also part of the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement is serving, the interests of people. It's also actually, on a side note, it's also serving the interests of people in England, Scotland, and Wales, because it protects the European Court of Human Rights. But I think what we'll have to do now is just, as we say here, go with the flow. Let's see where this takes us. The most important thing that we do have to do here is to stay calm, no triumphalism. This place has suffered so much because of triumphalism that we cannot continue in that vein. We must unite the people. We must work together to achieve bargains.
A Protestant state for Protestant people, decades of discrimination, some of it almost unbelievable to English eyes, just in terms of the way the media reaches us and the way that these things are reported. Triumphalism, you're quite right to guard against, but I mean, almost irony, perhaps, to reflect upon the fact that this scale has now tipped in the way that it has. Given that history, Brenda, you're a wonderful one for looking at the future, and I think that's so important. But today am going to look a little bit at the past, and there is, as you cite Ian Paisley's disgusting words about Catholics, that there is strength in numbers, and that is a game changer.
Well, it's ironic because I'm actually being interviewed later on for a David Olusoga documentary on the Union. I'm going to be one of the voices that's in front of camera.
Get you?
And so I've obviously spoken to the producers, and they know how I feel about that. I am a socialist, James, as you know. Yes. But the past has happened. We have to put it to rest. There are a lot of things that happened here that were instigated by the British government, a lot of injustice. They watched while people were murdered on the street by their own soldiers themselves, things that were covered up. There's a bigger picture here. People here are still fighting for the truth about how their family members were murdered on the street. So it's such a large political spectrum that needs to be addressed.
It is, and you remind us of the importance actually of prioritising peace over everything else, which is a timely reminder in the context of Northern Ireland Protocol negotiations and Joe Biden's latest contributions to that particular area. Brenda, I'm going to crack on only because there's so many people waiting to speak. I know you could talk for much longer on this, and I could listen to you for much longer. But also, you've got to get into hair and makeup. You've got to get ready for your TV appearance later today. We'll speak soon. Thank you. Aislinn's in Stoke Newington. Aisling, how does this reach you? How does this news hit you?
Well, I'm a young person, James, and I've been living away from home now for nearly 10 years, but going back frequently to look after family. And I think today is a really historic moment for the peace process, for the Catholic community. And also, I completely agree with Brenda. I think that we need to prioritise peace and doing everything in the most peaceful way possible. But I think the UK government, certainly the Tory government for several years now, have really underestimated the importance of this issue. And now we are in a position where I would agree with you. I think that this probably does mark the death knell of the United Kingdom as it stands. I don't think it's a warning shot. And I think even the Americans, obviously Biden trying to wade in on this issue and getting involved, it's a really important thing, and obviously Truss and Johnson have completely disregarded it. So,
and Brexit. I mean, let's not forget that the temptation to put your lot in, the vote against leaving the European Union that Northern Ireland delivered, means that people look at, if you like, an escape route of unification in a way that they wouldn't entirely politically, devoid of religion, in a way that they wouldn't have done prior to 2016. So if that was like the crowbar being put into the United Kingdom was Brexit, this result is, and indeed Sinn Féin's result in the last Stormont elections, that's the weight being applied to the other end of the crowbar, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think, people are keenly aware that they didn't vote for Brexit. I imagine there are people in the north who are still feeling the effects of it. businesses, but also businesses in the north, because of the current situation, are probably benefiting from the south as well.
Yes.
And I think that there has been a move, even in the unionist community, to viewing reunification as something that might be advantageous, and that's a change as well.
That's a really good point. It's part of a lot of moving pieces, isn't it? This statistic, this story.
Absolutely. Identity, obviously, is another big shift. We've seen people in terms of how they identify with their nationality, but also people in the north, they currently don't have a government. We have a rule from Westminster directly, because the DUP will not get into government with Sinn Féin. And they say it's for other reasons, but really it's because they're the biggest party and they don't want to have a Sinn Féin First Minister. And I think people find that pathetic. I think people are hurting in terms of the economy, they're hurting in terms of their finances, and they need government. And they're not getting that at the moment.
And all of this will add to that sense of unsustainable status quo, whatever you may feel politically, religiously, or even economically, even Brexitly. This idea that this can carry on as it is, I would argue, absolutely unsustainable. But where do you sit on this then as a DUP supporter? I'm not asking Aislinn that question. I'm asking you, if you're listening and you are a DUP supporter. Again, Anglo-Irish perspective coming up, which is probably going to have people spluttering into their tea from Derry to Belfast. But here is the thing. It seems to me that unionist politics in Northern Ireland has been clinging to the carcass of the idea that the union would survive regardless for quite a long time now. Almost a sort of cultish devotion to something that statistics were going to render unsustainable. I'm very mindful of Brenda and Aislinn's caution when it comes to words like triumphalism. Absolutely right. Celebrations and party poppers are going to be rubbing one half of the population's face into news that they will find very hard to swallow. But that phrase Brenda reminded us of, a Protestant state for Protestant people, now has a Catholic majority. And, no one yet disputing my cautious suggestion that this is probably the end of the United Kingdom, when it's coupled with all the other events. For me, at least, as you could probably guess, most importantly, Brexit. I find it unbelievable that an entire country can be dragged out of the European Union against its own wishes because of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage, and the editor of the Daily Mail perpetrating an epic con job upon the people of England. It is. I feel the same, similarly sympathetic towards Scotland, of course, but it's going to be easier. I think you're quite possibly going to see a unification of Ireland before you see another referendum on an independent Scotland. But who knows? All of this, of course, is evidence of making Britain great again, taking back control, and really driving home the importance of sovereignty as we look upon the almost inevitable breakup as a United Kingdom, if not a consequence of Brexit, then Brexit, when set against this story today about religion and the story earlier this year about politics, it's a flipping big catalyst, isn't it? And you are welcome to ring in and say, no, it isn't. 0345 6060 973 is the number, whatever it is that you feel minded to tell me. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines. 10:33 is the time. A sense with domestic politics of a slightly Trumpish feel at the moment. I hope it doesn't turn out to be that way. But in the early days of announcing so many apparently obnoxious policy ideas that it's hard to know which one we should focus on and get angry about. Just a slight sense of that, although I think I'll wait until the mini budget tomorrow before. Is it tomorrow, the mini budget? Yes, it is. I'm reliably informed it's tomorrow. When I say reliably, that translates as not by Keith. So I'm reliably informed that the mini budget is tomorrow. I think we'll wait until we've heard a little bit more about that before going too far down this road. But lifting a ban on fracking, just as the guy that founded Quadrilla, the biggest fracking outfit, certainly at one point in this country, has said this country's just not right for it. It'll never produce anything worthwhile. And incredibly unpopular with the public. It just seems to be another one of those things that's been turned almost into a culture war. Then you've got this determination to press ahead with lifting a ban on 200% bonuses for bankers. You must avoid the language of saying lifting a ban on bankers' bonuses. Right? It's lifting a cap on bankers' bonuses, and that cap currently stands at 200% of salary. So if you're paid £1 million, this is maths, if you're paid £1 million a year, the current maximum cap you can have if you're working in the City of London is £2 million in bonus on top of your £1 million salary. And how the hell you can expect people to work for that sort of chicken feed? Kwasi Kwarteng does not know. So again, that kind of policy, that the idea that we're going to have tax cuts, which obviously benefit the wealthiest people, while a refusal to offer up any help to people who need the most kind of support, equal support, depending. So I get a better deal under the tax cuts than that nurse over there does, or that person working cleaning trains. And remember, if they go on strike, the people cleaning trains, that's absolutely appalling, and it's going to damage our economy. But if bankers don't get a massive increase, if a train cleaner goes on strike in pursuit of a bit more pay, that's unsustainable and appalling and disgusting. But if we don't make sure that bankers can have more than 200% of their annual salary by bonus, then the economy is going to grind to a juddering halt. You want growth, then you don't pay ordinary working people a wage that allows them to live with dignity. You leave them on as little as you can get away with paying them, and you make sure that the richest, most well-rewarded people in the country can be even more rewarded. That's Trussonomics. Or trickle-down, or whatever it is you prefer to call it. And just on the subject of trickle-down that we talked about a lot yesterday, there is, you know how hilarious I find the so-called Institute of Economic Affairs and the idea that they are routinely wheeled out to offer up opinions, in quotes, on broadcast organisations, despite consistently refusing to reveal who it is that actually pays their wages. So just think about that for a minute. The idea that you would be treated as the sort of counterbalance to economists whose background and funding is entirely transparent, while refusing to reveal who it is that actually pays the wages of your staff. They're in a right old tizzy about even the use. So are the Spectator. Oh no, there's no such thing as trickle-down economics. It's actually hilarious. I mean, it's as if you and I talk about drinking the Kool-Aid, and these fellas come along, obviously never revealing who it is that's putting them up to it or paying their wages, to tell us that Kool-Aid doesn't actually exist. There's no such thing as Kool-Aid while they're drinking it. No such thing as Kool-Aid. If it didn't have such grim ramifications for our entire country, it would be hilarious. And the fact, wow. On we go. 10:37. Patrick's in Belfast. Patrick, back to the big story of the day. Catholics have outnumbered Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time. What do you make of it all?
Well, as some of your other callers have pointed out, we kind of expected that to happen, just with the way the population kind of growth was going. But I think it's very easy to get kind of carried away with the figures that are being released here. Like, for example, it's saying, 45%. 45.7%, I think it was, are Catholic, and 43% are Protestant. But with Northern Ireland,
in the land of Brexit, Patrick, that's an epic margin. You must remember.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely huge. But like, if you look at the Northern Ireland census, it's a bit unique compared to the UK or the rest of the UK in that we actually ask two religion questions.
Right.
In that we ask the religion you belong to and the religion you're brought up in.
Do we not do that in the rest of the UK?
I don't think so.
Are you sure? I can't remember.
I'm not 100%, so you can't quote me on it.
No, well, I won't. But I mean, it's a much more loaded question in Northern Ireland than it is in most of the rest of the UK anyway, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And like, even if you look at just the religion that people have reported, the swing's even bigger because the number of people who reported just their religion as Catholic was 42.3, and for Protestant it was 37. The problem is, with that 45% figure that the newspapers are reporting, that second question is asked of people who have no religion or report that they don't have any religion. Yes. And then they're asked what their background is, and then they assign whether they're Protestant or Catholic based on what they were brought up in. But
two things.
No, up to 45.
I understand your point, but the direction of traffic isn't going to change. It hasn't changed for 30 years. And the fact that we've been talking about it for 30 years or more does slightly challenge the suggestion that it's not quite as epochal as some people are behaving today. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, no, fully agree.
So what does it mean? I mean, how would you react to my over-the-top radio shock jock statement that this is the beginning of the end of the United Kingdom as we know it?
Oh, no, I think that's silly. I think Scotland's probably got as much chance of breaking away at the same time or before we do.
Well, in terms of treaty, you have a much more easily activated path out of the United Kingdom than Scotland does. Yours is enshrined in law, as it were. I mean, albeit that it relies upon the say-so of the Northern Ireland Secretary, and you simultaneously, of course, need a plebiscite, a referendum in the Republic of Ireland as well. Scotland has no recourse to treaty in demanding a referendum. Northern Ireland does. Ireland as an island does.
Oh yeah, no, that's completely true. But like, if you look, as you pointed out earlier, if you look at the national identity figures, the majority of people still identify as British.
Yes, they do. But that doesn't mean they'd be opposed to unification. One of the great discoveries for me in the immediate aftermath was Brexit, was the number of unionists absolutely stunned to discover that they were actually in favour of unification of Ireland now for economic reasons, because the religious and sectarian reasons have faded into the past since the Good Friday Agreement. Not obviously completely, but they were contemplating a path they never thought they'd contemplate in their life. I can imagine a British person, and don't forget, you're telling us that 32% of the population see themselves as British only, 29% as Irish only, but you've got 8% who consider themselves British and Northern Irish only. So I don't think we're going to be able to extrapolate too much from these numbers.
Well, that's kind of what I was trying to get at, really, is that these figures are... They're confusing. Well,
yes, of course they are.
You know, it's because the situation is so confusing within Northern Ireland, not because of how the data was collected. It's more that, you know, you've got more Catholics and Protestants, but you've got more people who want to be British than they want to be Irish. You've got more people with a British passport, but the number of people with an Irish passport is increasing. Although, from an anecdotal point of view, like, my parents are Unionists. They've got themselves an Irish passport because, you know, Brexit's made things a hell of a lot more complicated.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so like reading into the
and what would they do now? What would they do now if I mean, this is never going to happen, thankfully, because the Good Friday Agreement is such a beautiful piece of legislation.
Yeah.
What would they do if they were forced to choose between one passport or the other?
Honestly, probably emigrate to France.
But they'd need their Irish passport to do. They'd need their Irish passport to do that. Their British one would be no use. So you've answered the question without intending to. And they're Unionists and they're Protestants, and they see themselves as British.
Yeah.
But they'd choose the Irish passport over the British passport if push came to shove, which is precisely the point I was trying to make about why that small majority of people who see themselves as British is meaningless, perhaps, in the context of unification.
Yeah, but that was more to make life easier.
Yeah, I know, but that's what are you going to prioritise? What are you going to prioritise? Your fealty to a religion that you probably don't even practice anymore, or making your life easier, better, and more prosperous?
Exactly.
Yeah. Bloody Brexit, eh? And I'm trying not to... I mean, it is incredible. You've given Northern Irish Unionists a pragmatic reason to want to out of the United Kingdom by voting for Brexit.
Yeah.
Whoa. There it is.
Much, but because you're looking at one figure not related to the others,
you're quite right.
It's so hard to see what the clear picture is.
Of course, and I'm not claiming that, but I'm more, and this is typical me, isn't it, sitting in London telling a fella called Patrick in Belfast that I disagree with you about your analysis of Northern Irish politics.
No, I mean, I could well be wrong. I mean, everybody
So could I. But I sense momentum, Patrick. I sense momentum at a pace that you don't sense at the moment.
Oh, there is momentum, but like, I mean, I think the only way you'd actually figure it out is by doing an actual border poll, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, you're right.
We won't know what the results are. We can just make assumptions, but you know what they say about making assumptions. I mean, we assumed we'd be staying in the EU, and look how that happened.
Yeah. Well, you never know. Yeah, you might be back in it. You might be back in it before the rest of us are. Although I take your point. Also, momentum. One man's momentum is another man's confirmation bias, and as Miriam points out in a tweet, everyone is going to be looking at these numbers from a perspective of perhaps subject to confirmation bias, seeing what they want to see. So I was very honest, full disclosure at the top about my own background, the apostrophe in the middle of my name, and the Catholicism that was a huge part and remains a huge part of my life. It's 11:15. Thank you, Patrick. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Catholics have outnumbered Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time. It's not a majority. You'd have to be over 50% for a majority. It's 46% of the population is now Catholic, 43% Protestant or another Christian religion. A fascinating, absolutely fascinating development, albeit one that has had the inevitability of the sun coming up in the morning. And it's something that the Unionist movement in Northern Ireland must have been engaged in a degree of cognitive dissonance with. Well, I mean, you try and think of a country where a tiny minority maintains power. Off the top of my head, you're only going to come up with apartheid-era South Africa. And while there was a form of apartheid in Northern Ireland for a very long time, no one's going to suggest echoes of that sort of politics. But what happens as this gap gets bigger? The Unionists have spent lives and careers clinging to the notion of the Union being sacrosanct and unbreakable. It's why the Northern Ireland Protocol is such a silly thing for a British government to have signed, ignorantly or optimistically. That Unionist position, how does that sustain now? How do you look at these numbers, knowing the direction of traffic isn't going to change, unless you can engineer some sort of population explosion among the Protestant people of Northern Ireland? At what point do you have to accept that the gig is up? And it's not every single Catholic is going to be voting for a united Ireland, but you know the history and you know the proportions of it. When do you accept that it's game over? 10:46 is the time. 10:49 is the time. Ellen made me chuckle. The nuns at my school predicted this, James. That's why we all needed to have lots of children. That's reflecting on Dublin in the 60s. Well, you'd have to have moved across the border with your children to have impacted upon today's statistics that show Catholics outnumbering Protestants in Northern Ireland for the first time. It's not the only interesting bit of survey that is out there today. The British Social Attitude Survey has been published today as well. There is a challenge ahead of us, I'm going to warn you now, to make an interesting radio phone-in about electoral reform. This is going to be a very, very big issue, a very live issue for the Labour Party in particular and the country as a whole. I'll give you a simple indication. There were two senior Labour politicians in the building yesterday. One of them was being interviewed for the Newsagents podcast with John Sopel and Emily Maitlis and Lewis Goodall. If you're not across that yet, get it straight, feed it straight into your inbox. And the other one was with me for a forthcoming episode of Full Disclosure. Angela Rayner was insisting to Emily, John and Lewis that she is very much, in her own words, a first-past-the-post girl, so opposed to electoral reform, while elsewhere in the building, Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, was explaining his great and growing enthusiasm for electoral reform. So that's a battle really at the very heart of the Labour movement and one which we're going to be hearing an awful lot more about. But equally, it is one of the subjects that I've historically found hardest to get excited about on the radio, or to make exciting radio with. But that, as you know, in this period, in this season of my time with you every morning, thinking that we've never quite got that to sing before, we now take as a challenge rather than a deterrent. So just because we've never got it to sing before means we will redouble our efforts to get it to sing tomorrow. We will not, except in the context of parking tickets, motorway lanes, and what's the other one? Cycle lane. Except in those subjects, I don't think I'm ever, because I keep hearing other people doing them, and they are still really, really dull. So I'm not, no. But on the one of electoral reform, yes, we will make it sing, possibly tomorrow. Miles is in Stenning to steer us back to Northern Ireland. Miles, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Ironically, the last time I spoke to you, it was about PR, but never mind.
Was it really? Oh no!
Yeah, it was.
Oh well, this is awkward. Your bit was, you were great. You were fantastic. You were the only, yeah. But it's not historically a subject that really floats my boat. Go on.
Anyway, so despite my accent, I need to claim a little bit of credibility on being able to comment on this. But I went to, while you were raving in Manchester in the 90s, I was a student in Northern Ireland.
Okay, fair enough.
And one of the things I think it isn't talked about is how Protestant politicians have failed the Protestant community.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people that I studied with, who were from Northern Ireland, now live in England.
Right.
They've moved to England because there's better job prospects, there's better education, there's better healthcare. And while the DUP have been embarked on their particular version of culture wars, what they've ignored is actually helping people live better lives in Northern Ireland. And as a result, Protestants have left Northern Ireland. So yes, there's a demographic.
But so would Catholics, though, in pursuit of a more prosperous existence. I mean, neither of us are going to have the numbers, but the reasons you've given for crossing the sea would apply as much to Catholics as they would to Protestants.
Yes, and I don't think you could ignore that the GDP per head in the Republic of Ireland is now higher than it is in the UK.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
but equally, Protestants. I'm not picking. Well, I suppose I am splitting hairs a bit. But you can go. But I mean, the beauty of the Good Friday Agreement is that you can go both ways. Whether you're a Protestant or a Catholic, you can move to the United Kingdom or to Ireland in pursuit of a better life. And if you are prioritising economic health over absolutely everything else, everyone would be moving to the Republic at the moment, as you remind us with those statistics.
Yeah, and of course this is anecdotal, but like I say, the people I studied with, mostly Protestants.
Yeah, they've headed here.
Live in England. If I meet someone from Northern Ireland now, in Sussex or in London through work or socially or whatever, they've moved to England. They tend to be Protestant, in my experience.
Yeah.
And I just think...
And that's pragmatism more than anything else.
Yes, and I think it explains why, the DUP vote is starting to disintegrate and move to the Alliance.
Yes.
That there's a pragmatic element in the Protestant community that just wants to live a better life and is not actually that interested in waving flags and all the other nonsense that takes place.
And it's important probably to stress that was an incredibly seductive way of life for an incredibly long time. That what you describe as waving flags and all that other sort of nonsense does define the existence of some people in Northern Ireland, never mind the political careers of some people in Northern Ireland. And not unlike Brexit, this sort of mythical notion of nationhood, or whatever you want to call it, sovereignty or autonomy, very, very flirting every step of the way with xenophobia or worse, in this case, sometimes religious hatred. But it was a defining light, a guiding light. It's like the kind of Mark Francois, Andrew Bridgens of British politics, who really don't understand anything about economics or politics even, but are just committed to some sort of flag fornication, in a sense.
But I think that's also why it's potentially very dangerous to just simply talk about this as an inevitable. There's going to be a border poll because the maths will make it happen, and blah blah blah. What people are forgetting is
variables.
A lot of those people, a lot of people's identity in Northern Ireland, in places like Ballymena and Coleraine,
yes, is
very closely linked to a history and a tradition and a culture that they hold very dearly, and in order. All the problems of Northern Ireland will just be flipped over to the other side.
Yes, and as many people in the Republic are well aware of that, and the enthusiasm for it when you actually dig into the weeds is nowhere near as high as you might expect it to be from some of the slightly two-dimensional coverage, and I'm very much accusing myself of that today as well, the two-dimensional coverage that you often get on this side of the Irish Sea. I think you're right.
Yeah, and
I don't know about dangerous, but yes, it is dangerous, as in terms of inflaming problems, inflaming division, and we all know what comes next.
We know from the history of the British Empire that drawing lines on maps is not a particularly effective way of dealing with people.
And that rubbing them out doesn't solve those problems overnight either.
No.
I think we were almost profound there between us, Miles.
We're trying our best, aren't we?
We are, yeah. That's all any of us can do. I like your perspective, and I'm grateful for your thoughts. I really am. Everybody today coming at it from slightly different angles and with slightly different levels of importance being attached to these numbers, to these statistics, and that is exactly how it should be. Back to Belfast next. Joe's there. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How's it going?
I'm pretty good, Joe. What's on your mind?
I think today it's a significant day. It marks the end of a sectarian state, a state that was basically designed for Protestants and to ensure Protestant safety. But unfortunately, it was there was misruling in that state. There was a lot of sectarianism and a lot of triumphalism. A lot of discrimination. A lot of discrimination. A lot of people died. A lot of people were forced to move to England in order to secure work, or forced to move down south to secure work, or go elsewhere to secure work. And between the Unionist state and the British state, they've had an absolutely evil impact on society here. So today marks the end of that. It is no longer a Protestant state for Protestant people. And what the figures show is that we are now living in a shared state where no sect really has dominance over the other. And today, for me, marks the beginning of the end of this state. And it's now down to not only myself as a person, but our community leaders, our civic, religious leaders, our politicians, to reinforce the values of the Good Friday Agreement, to work towards a shared future.
That's the crucial point, actually, and how interesting that it comes in, and Brenda really addressing.
Brenda's brilliant.
Speaking from a similar perspective, wasn't she? There,
Yep.
Because you list the historical injustices correctly, and of course, the minute you list the historical injustices, you open the door to revenge, to reprisals, to reverses. Right? We were on the wrong end of it now, so you're going to be on the wrong end of it next. But that's Enoch.
No. Listen, that's not the narrative.
I'm praising you. I'm saying that's the door. The door opens. The possibility of it opens. The priority, as you're explaining, is to make sure it gets slammed shut again, because there's no point bringing about a peace process and then swinging the pendulum back towards the previously oppressed people of Northern Ireland and just swapping. I mean, it's what Enoch Powell talks about: whip hands and moving it from white people to black people, tacitly admitting the appalling treatment of black people by white people through the ages, but only talking about it because he's frightened that the roles are about to be reversed. So no, I wasn't suggesting you were doing it. You were warning against it, Joe.
I'm warning against it because any sort of if you spend 5-10 minutes talking to a member of a Protestant Unionist loyalist community, fear. A lot of things that drive them is fear, fear of what will happen in a new Ireland, and how will Protestants be treated? Will Protestants be treated the way that Protestants treated Catholics?
And despite the DUP opposing it, as you remind us, the way the Good Friday Agreement is both written and framed, and also in many ways what isn't actually written down in it, but which has enormous significance, is something that with patience and kindness, many people on that side of the community could come to realise that it very much looks after them and addresses the fears that you describe. I'm cracking on only because I'm a little late for this. It's 4 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just a nod back to the conversation we had in the last hour. We're going to move on now. My apologies to Mark. I love the locations on this as well. So my apologies to Mark in Belfast, to Tom in Cork, to Peter in Newry, and to various other people in Britain as well. Seth, Mick, Jay. Short of women again. At least we opened with Brenda today. Brenda opening the batting on the programme, but we managed to get almost to the end of yesterday's programme without any calls from women, and it means I'm doing something wrong. I'm not making you feel as welcome as perhaps I could do, so I shall endeavour to address that. But just mentioning Northern Ireland, a quick glance in the rearview mirror. If you do follow me on Twitter, at Mr. James OB, then I posted something a little earlier today, which is a tribute in many ways to one of the finest radio broadcasters ever to work in the English language. I speak of the late, extremely great Gerry Anderson. And unfortunately, I tweet so much, it's disappeared halfway down my timeline. But I tweeted it about an hour ago, and you can see it. It's an animated sort of depiction of a radio phone-in programme. And obviously, if you're listening to this, you must have something of a soft spot for radio phone-in programmes. Gerry was just the Don. We're talking Eddie Mair levels of a synergy between human and radio, human and medium. And this is just a thing of absolute beauty. And there's a little Northern Irish animation studio called Flickerpix, which used to do, when my clips go viral, imagine if someone was making versions of them with the original audio, but using almost stop motion type animation to depict me and then the caller as well. They've done that, and it's a thing of absolute beauty and a tribute to one of the finest broadcasters ever to draw breath, never mind work in the English language, the late great Gerry Anderson. So do go and have a look at that. My thanks to Paul O'Kane who has tweeted it, tweeted it, but it goes back several years. Gerry hasn't been with us for a while now, but anyway, if you like those moments that we occasionally have together, when something truly unbelievable happens live on the radio and leaves us all rolling on the floor, weeping with laughter. I've set the bar high, and I'm confident that it will be easily cleared by that little clip there of Jerry Anderson and a caller with a chicken. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Change of pace now, change of subject, change of topic. I often wonder about these things. My suspicion is that we need to talk to a lot of doctors on this one. Therese Coffey is announcing her plans today to tidy up GP services, and to my layman's eye, they just look daft. They seem to be built upon two things. Therese Coffey, a week into her new job, has identified loads of things that GPs could have been doing to free themselves up to make more appointments with patients. I just find that unlikely. All right, that's all I'm going to say. I could be wrong. Maybe she's a genius. Maybe she has been sitting there. What was her last job? Therese Coffey? Maybe she was sitting in work and pensions, actually spending the afternoons looking at the NHS, thinking, how can we make GP appointments better? How can we make sure that there are faster GP appointments? And therefore, she's come straight out of the block, second week in the job, and she's actually got a plan for GP appointments. It just seems to me to be unlikely. That's all. Not least the speed with which she's come up with this plan. And if we look at it, the paucity of the plan itself. So she will today promise. The thing about promises is that they are not policies, really. I could promise you that if you carry on listening to this radio programme until 1 o'clock, you will become a millionaire. Couldn't I? I promise you. I mean, I could. I'll better just double check with Ofcom on this. This is very much a flight of fancy and a theoretical scenario that I'm positing. But I could promise, and it gets to 1 o'clock and you're not a millionaire. What happens? What recourse have you got? I don't get dragged off the radio. But for that period there, I've got you listening, right? Who's going to turn off their radio if they've been promised £1 million, if they stay tuned until 1 o'clock? Nobody, except Elon Musk, maybe. But even he probably see it as easy money. So that is why the word promise, I think, needs to be properly understood in this context. Therese Coffey will today promise to free up doctors' time by expanding schemes that allow other health professionals to do more routine care, estimating it will mean an extra 1.2 million GP appointments a year. This bit, I think, probably does work. Pharmacists will also be able to hand out more medicines without a doctor's prescription. You're a doctor. What do you think? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. OK? What do we think about this? Doctors criticise NHS rescue plan. There is a letter to the Times newspaper from 10 former health ministers saying that the NHS is no longer fit for purpose. They've called for a discussion about a fundamental rethink of how it is organised. That, I think, is a conversation for another day. We'll focus chiefly today on the specifics of this plan. The idea that you can free up 1.2 million GP appointments a year by getting other people in the practice to do some of the work that is currently being done by GPs. Maybe it's a stroke of genius. Maybe it's been hiding in plain sight for all these years. And you, as a GP, are sitting there this morning feeling a little bit like Homer Simpson, going, "No, why didn't we think of that, Marge? That's such an obvious way to improve things." Or, alternatively, it could be, as many industry representatives are already suggesting, it could be a load of sound and fury signifying nothing. Hot air, smoke mirrors, politicking, call it what you will. And part of this very, very weird mood emanating from Downing Street that essentially sees policies announced not to actually achieve anything or to provide change or movement, but merely to dominate a news cycle, to dominate a news agenda, and to create a conversation or an appearance of positivity when the facts behind the actual story will do nothing of the sort. But I know nothing, okay? Ollie in Oxford makes a valid point. Says you can't offer a board game without a load of terms and conditions, which you can find at lbc.co.uk. But are you sure you're allowed to offer £1 million without... I didn't really offer £1 million to people listening. I was just pointing out the difference between a promise and a policy. And now we'll find out. So a laser-like focus on patients is coming, but the most obvious bit of it, the first bit into which we can sink our collective teeth, is the idea that it's very hard to see a GP at the moment. I think we can all agree on that. There is also a resistance, cultural, I think in part, to online appointments, albeit that they are generally a force for good. The problem with change, of course, is that there is more money to be made from resisting it than there ever will be from embracing it or seeking to understand it. I tell you, they're changing that thing over there. You're not going to let that happen, are you? And you will go, oh no, that's awful. That's absolutely shocking. You can't do this. You can't do that. If I sit here, as I sometimes try to do, saying, well, have you really thought through whether or not possibly the new status quo will be better than the old one, or that this might actually be quite a good thing? It's a much harder hill to climb. It's that old adage of mine about the speak your weight machine. The queue at the ghost train, the queue of people lining up to be frightened is going to be a hell of a lot longer than the queue of people lining up for the speak your weight machine at the same fairground. People aren't that interested. He pays your money, he wants your thrills and your spills. So you're not going to be able to see your GP anymore. That is very easy to deliver to you as something frightening, something bad, something to be resisted. But it doesn't mean it should be. Most doctors speak very warmly of online appointments, and what is the point of technological advances if not to improve the way we interact and the way that we live together? But there is still a shortage of appointments. It's still very hard to get an appointment with your GP in most parts of the country, which means that in the simplest of terms, we need to somehow squeeze more appointments out of the same number of doctors. And Therese Coffey's suggestion is you do this by letting other people do some of the things that the doctors currently do. And that, I think, can only really be explained to us. The wisdom of this, the plausibility of this promise, can only really be explained to us by people either currently or very recently working as general practitioners in the United Kingdom. If you fall into that category, the number you need is 0345 60973. I always try to get one rather large rock on which we can build the rest of the conversation when we're having conversations like this. So it seems to me the bit that we can't argue about, the bit that's indisputable, is that the priority is to get more appointments out of the same number of GPs. You can simultaneously be trying to get more GPs into the NHS or tempting retired GPs back into the NHS or trying to get part-time GPs to increase their hours. That's all about incentivization. But in the simplest of terms, the first premise very simply is we've got to get more appointments out of the same number of GPs. So it'd be like getting me to do an extra hour of radio. There's only one of me. There are only a finite number of hours in the day. At the moment I do 3, they want me to do 4. And there wouldn't be any balance on that. You wouldn't get me to do an extra hour on the radio by getting Keith to take up some of the gag writing responsibilities, for example, that obviously single this programme out from so-called rivals. But that's the point. You've got a finite number of GPs and 1.2 million more appointments. So there are 2 questions here. What do you think of Therese Coffey's idea? 0345 6060 973. And then secondly, I think possibly patients can join in this bit of the conversation, and that then means all of us, doesn't it? Potentially or actually. Can you think of a way to get more appointments out of the same number of GPs? Especially when you've got this cultural objection to online appointments up and running now, because that's a really good way to get more appointments out of the same number of GPs. What do we think about the Health Secretary's proposals? 0345 6060 973. And can you think of any ways to get more GP appointments out of the same number of GPs? 0345 6060 973. 18 minutes after 11 is the time. Mystery Hour on the way, of course, at 12. I forgot to give you a heads up about that, didn't I? It's something to take the edge off, as it were. Something of a livener against a relatively grim diet of news. We're probably going to be seeing some movement in interest rates. So, as we occasionally do on such days, we'll take some time at 12 o'clock to have a look at that, quite probably. Before getting stuck into Mystery Hour proper. And by way of light relief, there's a lovely list today of the top 10 things you promise that you'll do as a parent and then don't. The top 10 sort of pledges, the vows that you will break. The only question is how long will it take? And I might run you through those as well if there's time, but I want to get stuck into this GP story first. the idea that I got one or two people suggesting that I'm being a bit of a glum, a bit of a misery guts. It has been known that I'm a bit of a misery guts. My initial cynicism, which I would hope to see assuaged or alleviated or even dismantled, my initial lack of joy comes from the unlikelihood of Therese Coffey having suddenly identified ways to create 1.2 million new GP appointments within a week of coming into the Department of Health. Partly because she hardly set the Department of Work and Pensions on fire, and partly because, well, statistics, numbers and facts. But we could be on the cusp of an incredible renaissance in GP surgeries, thanks to Therese Coffey identifying a relatively simple way to free up 1.2 million more appointments despite not increasing the number of GPs. Let's find out. Kim's in Kingsbridge. Kim, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm a GP. I'm not working. I'm on maternity at the moment, but haven't been on maternity for that long.
No, it was an average gestation period, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, it's just a bit bonkers, isn't it? Really.
I don't know. You're the doctor. You tell me.
Yes. Well, I mean, we already have other health practitioners in our surgeries doing all of our more simple cases. This is not a new idea.
Most of us see the nurse more than we see the doctor, don't we?
Yeah,
we've got quite a lot going on.
We've got paramedics as well. We've got we've got advanced nurse practitioners. We've got practice nurses. This is not a new idea, to be honest, and it's not going to make, I don't think, any difference at all.
What? Well, I mean, can we try again? Can we be a tiny bit more optimistic? I mean, is there any? All right, I'll give you the 1.2 million. Might be overly ambitious.
Yeah.
But is there no room? Is there no room? Is there nothing you currently do that someone else could? There you go. I got the question in the end. That's why they pay me the big bucks. Is there nothing you currently do where, in all honesty and in good conscience, you could think to yourself, well, they could actually do that?
Not really.
Oh.
I mean, to be honest, there are. If you want suggestions, there's other suggestions of ways to free up GP's time.
Go on.
And if Theresa Coffey asked us, I'm sure we could tell her. I mean, social care is a big problem. We spend a lot of time doing dealing with social care stuff.
Yes.
We've got a lot of patients who are in residential homes who should be in nursing homes.
Right. Yes.
But by that, we then have to long home visits to nursing.
So you could see 10. You could see 10 patients in under one roof in the time it takes you to see 2 under 2 roofs.
Exactly. There's also a really long waiting list. Obviously for any hospital appointments at the moment. So we and that's a big problem for GPs. We see a lot of patients who are in pain awaiting a hip replacement, for example. Those patients also take up a lot of our time as well because they can be quite complex. So there are things that can be done.
But these are huge systemic changes of the kind that Andy Burnham was contemplating when he was Health Secretary, as bringing social care into an NHS-style scenario. And that is not going to be fixed by... And also, I mean, it's not as if your paramedics and your practice nurses and other members of your practice are sitting around twiddling their thumbs while you see all the... That's the other flaw in this plan, is that she seems to think they're all sitting in the canteen playing canasta.
Yeah, I mean, and the retention is a problem with them as well because it's also, quite stressful. And I guess another thing you could, if you want to increase up, GP hours, it's very. People always laugh when I say this, but for a GP working more than 3 days a week, it's very, very intense. Work is very intense for me, and I work 10, 11, 12-hour days when I'm at work. Yes. And so it's only really it's not conceivable for me to work more than 3 days a week. If you made GP a bit easier and a bit less stressful, then people probably would do more hours.
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying, but again, it's that speak your weight machine principle again, is that if I was a different sort of human being, never mind a different sort of broadcaster, I would now start lampooning you for being lazy, and that would create an idea in the mind of your patients that you're not a committed professional dedicated to looking after people. And why people swallow that shocking abuse that is directed at your profession, I don't know, but we've all seen it, heard it and read it, haven't we?
Yeah.
I guess they make a little bit more money out of hurling abuse at you than they would out of trying to understand how we could help to make your life better. But I'm grateful that you've helped me understand some of the ways in which your life could be made better, albeit dismayed to discover that none of them are on Therese Coffey's to-do list. Kim, I shall enjoy keeping you company during your maternity leave. I don't know whether you're allowed to have me on in the practice when you go back to work, but it's possibly something might distract people. I could work as an anaesthetic. Shelley's in Ealing. Shelley, what would you like to say?
Hi, first-time caller.
Welcome. Don't be, it's only me.
Okay, so first thing I'd like to say is it's not Therese Coffey's idea.
Pardon?
So it's not Therese Coffey's idea.
No, I heard you. That was a rhetorical pardon. I do apologise. I should have made it clearer. That's okay.
This has been happening for a couple of years.
Right.
I work in a large practice, and we are now 2/3 of the GPs we were 7 years ago.
Yes.
And this is, obviously the service is not what it was then, but we are coping because we have a lot of what are called allied healthcare professionals in the practice now. There's full-time clinical pharmacists, paramedics, physicians associates, a whole host of different people that take away from the GPs.
Yes.
Documentation, filing, and jobs that can be done by other people. Now, I'm not arguing the rights or wrongs of this. It is a limited solution.
Well, limited to...
Go on, sorry.
1.2 million more GP appointments can be created overnight by getting all that lot to do more.
Yeah, exactly. It's limited in that it's not that good of a solution. But I mean, I called from the whole sort of Therese Coffey's been in the department for 2 weeks.
Yes.
This was put in practice several years ago, and in fact, GPs were financially incentivised to do this.
We're at slightly cross purposes here. We're at slightly cross purposes here, and it's probably my fault because everyone knows that practice, I mean, we covered this with Kim, the last caller. Everybody knows that practices contain lots of associated healthcare professionals. We always think immediately of the nurse, the practice nurse. But as you remind us, and as Kim described as well from her own practice, you've got the nurses and the paramedics and the physician associates and pharmacists and all that sort of thing. So no one is suggesting, and this isn't my fault, I think, if this is what you've come away thinking, that I was suggesting. No one's suggesting that this isn't already happening and that Therese Coffey is just going to invent these roles and they're all going to get appointed and arrive. The point that it is there already is the actual reason for my scepticism that this plan isn't really a plan at all. Because what she's effectively saying is that these doctors are currently doing loads of things that other people could be doing. And what I am saying and what Kim was saying is, well, actually, they already are doing pretty much everything else that they could be doing. So where are these 1.2 million new appointments going to come from?
Well, but more people could be doing it. I guess what I'm trying to explain is the balance of professional profile within a large surgery.
Yes.
So,
I don't think I need that explaining. I think I already understand that. So the question I asked Kim was, what are GPs currently doing that they haven't already been freed from doing? So what duties could they currently be relieved of? Well, I presume the people in your practice are not sitting around waiting for new jobs to be given to them. They're not sitting in the canteen playing canasta. But what are the duties that the nurses and the paramedics and the pharmacists and the physicians associates have got time to take on, and B, that GPs don't need to be doing themselves?
I think the point I'm trying to make is that it's a lot quicker, and it's not going to happen within a year. Her timescales are completely wrong, but changing...
No, again, we're still at cross purposes, Shelley. I understand what you're describing to me, how a GP's practice works. I know how a GP's practice works. What I don't know is specifically what it is a GP currently does that they don't need to do, but all the paramedics, nurses, physicians, associates and pharmacists in a practice will have time to do instead.
There are some GP practices that are not taking advantage of the fact that you can take away patient filing, documentation,
But not the one you're working in.
We've already done it.
That's what I'm saying. So I need to speak to someone who is actually still a GP who's still doing their own filing and their own paperwork, or who doesn't have the support staff that you describe. And we need to find enough of them to create 1.2 million new appointments. And I'd urge you not to hold your breath. Pardon?
Right. And you need to be able to... don't get me wrong, I'm not defending the proposal at all.
No, I genuinely think we were at cross purposes. Yeah, I don't know if you heard Kim's call. The idea that she's come up with the idea of support staff in GPs' practices, I don't think anybody else has taken that away from the first half an hour of this phone, Shelley, with the greatest of love and respect. But you're probably busy. You've probably got a lot of other things going on. So, no, Therese Coffey's idea is that we can increase what already is done to a degree that will create 1.2 million GPs appointments. And I think that is almost certainly hogwash. 11:30 is the time. Holly Harris is here with your headlines. 33 minutes after 11. Would you like to witness a sort of red button secret radio moment? Okay, this is the kind of conversation that sometimes occurs when you can't hear us talking in the studio. Ready for this? Okay. I haven't actually summoned you yet, mate. Do you think... should we do a summons? Do it quickly. Should we do a summons for you?
No, you don't have to. We'll just make it a special occasion.
I think they like it. They like the summons. Okay. Summon the Usherwood. Crikey, that was quick.
Very quick, yes. To bring you up to date, because Tory backbenchers, James, are losing their minds in the House of Commons after the government decided to press ahead.
Not a lot left to lose in some cases.
They are very, very angry because, of course, the government this morning decided to press ahead and lift the ban on fracking. You'll remember that in the 2019 Conservative manifesto, which was written when Boris Johnson was Conservative leader and Prime Minister, there was a solemn promise that the Conservative government would not press ahead with fracking.
And that is the manifesto upon which the 80-seat majority is built.
It is. And and Liz Truss indeed made a promise, you'll hear a bit of this in a moment, that she wouldn't press ahead with fracking. Nevertheless, the government did this. There was this scientific review. The scientific review came back and said that there were still risks with fracking. No worries, no bother for Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Business and Energy Secretary. He decided actually just change the limits and then you could press ahead with fracking.
Because that worked really well with Owen Paterson, didn't it? When Owen Paterson broke the rules and J-Dog led the campaign to change the rules so that he wouldn't have broken the rules. That worked really well.
You sometimes, when you look at the House of Commons, just because you get so many MPs in one place making their comments, you get a feeling that a plan might not have been thought through particularly well, listening to the comments of MPs. And we start with a fairly mild-mannered MP, actually, Mark Menzies. He represents the Conservative constituency of Filden on the Lancashire coast, beautiful part of the world, just south of Blackpool. And, of course, it could be a spot for...
Good football team.
Could be a good spot.
National League North.
It could be a good spot for fracking.
Yes.
And he took umbrage with this comment from the Business Secretary.
Bringing on this supply will bring us cheaper energy, which we need. That will help our constituents. It secures our supply, which will ensure that our businesses can continue to operate whatever the weather. This is of such importance, and it is sheer Ludditery, Mr. Speaker, that opposes it.
Well, Benson, there's nothing Luddite about the people of Lancashire or of Fylde. And I just want to start by saying, Mr. Speaker, how disappointed I am that Parliament was not informed about this before the media, that as a local Member of Parliament I was not given the courtesy, despite having requested for 2 weeks, contacting the Honourable Member to get information via his PPS. I've sent letters, I've sent WhatsApps, nothing back. So, Mr. Speaker, can we be crystal clear on one thing? The Prime Minister of the Manchester Hustings, it's a matter for public record, you can find the clip, made it crystal clear, no ifs, no buts, no caveats, that fracking would only take place in the United Kingdom where there was local consent. Crystal clear.
The problem that Rees-Mogg's got, not for the first time in his life, is that none of the experts agree with him.
No.
What's the head of Quadrilla said today? Remind us what Quadrilla is and talk us through what he said about the fracking that Jacob Rees-Mogg insists is going to create cheaper energy. He's also moving the goalposts on earthquakes.
Yes.
So I had no idea that seismology was among his many talents as well, but apparently he's a man of many, many gifts.
So Quadrilla has said that actually it won't make, the boss of Quadrilla said it actually won't make any substantial difference.
But why should we listen to him? What does he know about fracking?
Because he
What
drills,
is Quadrilla?
It's a drilling company. It drills for shale gas. In fact, it owned and ran the last shale drill drilling spot. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. Where they were before it closed, before the moratorium was put in place, and all the drilling companies packed up and went home.
And he said the UK just isn't fit for fracking.
Yes. And of course
But Rees-Mogg knows better.
So Jacob Rees-Mogg is planning to press ahead, and of course the argument put forward by the government is with the energy crisis we need to have our own domestic supply, so we do not rely on foreign supplies of energy and end up in the situation we are now with Russia and Ukraine and so forth. That's why they've decided this is part of the same narrative in terms of trying to reduce energy bills. Somebody else who's very cross, same part of the world, his constituency is Scott Benton. Again, another mild-mannered Conservative MP.
Will they be happy with you calling them mild-mannered?
Well, I'm mentioning.
Do you mean that they're
important.
not crackers? Is what you're saying, really? Because you may need to make this distinction among the. Are they 2019 intake?
No, I don't think. I think Scott Benton, I'll need to check it. We'll listen to what he has to say.
But they're not the kind of ones who flick the finger to crowds like that awful Andrea What's-a-Chops woman, or the ones who claim that So when you say mild-mannered, you mean that they inhabit a vaguely recognisably rational universe,
and you wouldn't necessarily,
unlike Nadine Dorries, for example.
You don't necessarily hear them on any
or Andrew Bridgen.
You don't necessarily hear them at any point up until now.
Kick
off
angry.
In the way that they're kicking off this morning.
I understand.
This is what Mr. Benton had to say.
Or Jonathan Gullis.
My constituents are understandably anxious about fracking returning to the Fylde coast, and so when will they receive an answer to some of these questions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend asks a very important question, because it is important for the national interest that we have secure supplies of gas. That is something important across the House to all constituents. But this will affect some residents much, much more than others, and therefore it is only right that they are compensated and that they receive some financial benefit for the inconvenience that they will have. Now, I would say to my honourable friend that the majority of the inconvenience does not actually come from the extraction of shale gas, but it comes from the building of the shale gas well in the first place and the lorry movements that are associated with that. And it is important that people benefit and are rewarded for doing something that is in the national interest.
Just a quick correction or clarification. Scott Benton is a 2019 intake MP. But what's interesting is Blackpool South was a Labour marginal. And so he is particularly worried, you would think about the issue of fracking, is that that's a narrow majority.
Yeah, of course.
Could he lose his seat at the next election?
Just recap briefly. They're breaking a manifesto pledge.
Yes.
And they are inflicting something that enjoys very, very, very little public support.
Yes.
Or indeed expert support on a public that doesn't want it. Why,
yes.
Theo? What do you mean? Okay, read the runes for me.
So what I would say is that one of the criticisms of Boris Johnson that went unnoticed during his final 6 months was that he didn't have a plan to turn the economy around. With all the scandals around the deputy chief whip and Partygate that engulfed his prime ministerialship, what the real criticism that many Conservative MPs had was that he didn't have a coherent plan to get UK PLC, to get the economy firing on all cylinders again. And so you would say, and I remember asking the question of his spokesman, what's your plan to turn the economy around? He said, well, we want a high-skilled, high-wage economy. And Liz Truss, you may not like the plan. You may think that the plan is the wrong plan. You may think that trickle-down, quote-unquote, trickle-down economics doesn't work.
Doesn't exist, according to The Spectator.
But there is a much clearer narrative now between what Liz Truss wants to do to actually get the economy going again, and in terms of getting rid of regulations,
so
reducing
here is
tactics.
A plan. I mean, Boris Johnson has no plan. He's got absolutely nothing to do. Liz Truss has a plan. She's going to do something that nobody supports and inflict it on people who don't want it. But you can describe it as a plan. And she's going to say it's going to create growth. It's going to create growth.
Exactly.
But the head of Quadrilla the largest company ever to attempt fracking in this country, says it's going to fail.
But there's also...
So who's cheering this, Theo?
Well, there are those particularly free market libertarian groups.
But in Parliament or the population, not people who won't tell us who pay their bills. Who's actually cheering this among the public or the parliamentary party?
I haven't heard many voices. I mean, Michael Fabricant spoke up for it.
Did he?
But he doesn't carry a huge amount of weight. Somebody who does carry a lot of weight amongst Conservative MPs, worked in the Whip's office, Sir Greg Knight.
Yes.
And he's a MP for East Yorkshire. He was scathing.
Oh.
Despite what he said, is it not the case that forecasting the occurrence of seismic events as a result of fracking remains a challenge to the experts? Is it not therefore creating a risk of an unknown quantity to pursue shale gas exploration at the present time?
Yes.
Is he aware the safety of the public is not a currency in which some of us choose to speculate?
Mr. Speaker, unusually I disagree with my right honourable friend that it is all a matter of proportionality, and that, as I pointed out, the movement on the ground level that we have from construction is more than double is about double that we have had from any instance with shale gas.
Chào em hoa cười hương sắc tươi xinh, anh đem cả tâm chân tình chào em. Hoa cười hương sắc tươi xinh, anh đem cả tâm chân tình chào em.